welcome to my channel. Today's story is a journey of secrets, transformation, and a side of myself. I thought becoming her creation was complete, until the doctor smiled and said, "Congratulations. Hey, friends. We're working our butts off to bring you this content, just for your entertainment. If you like what you see, here's a deal, instead of offering us tea, just hit that subscribe button. It's way easier, totally free, and honestly makes us just as happy." Let's begin the new surprising story. For you, I never imagined that love could reshape the very cells of your body. That trust could rewrite biology itself. But here I am, standing at the threshold of something impossible, something that has forced me to question every assumption I ever held about who I am and what it means to be whole. My name is Alex, and this is the story of how I agreed to help the person I loved most in the world, only to find myself transformed in ways neither of us could have predicted. This isn't a tale of science fiction or fantasy. It's the deeply personal account of what happened when the boundaries of my identity dissolved, when my body became a stranger to me, and when I had to learn what it truly means to accept yourself when everything you thought you knew turns out to be negotiable. I met Dr. Sarah Chain during my final year of graduate school. I was studying bioethics, fascinated by the philosophical questions surrounding human enhancement and medical intervention. She was presenting her research at a conference on regenerative medicine and hormone therapy, discussing breakthrough work in tissue adaptation and cellular reprogramming. Her passion was magnetic. She didn't just see medicine as treatment for illness. She saw it as a conversation with human potential itself. We started talking after her panel, and that conversation never really ended. Within months, we were inseparable. Sarah had this way of looking at the world that made everything seem more vivid, more possible. She believed that the human body was far more adaptable than we gave it credit for, that our rigid categories of male and female, possible and impossible, were often just failures of imagination backed by incomplete research. I loved that about her. Her refusal to accept limitations. Her commitment to expanding what healing could mean. When she invited me to participate in her research study 3 years into our relationship, I didn't hesitate. The project was ambitious, examining how targeted hormone therapy combined with advanced cellular scaffolding techniques could help people recovering from severe tissue damage. The goal was regeneration, restoration, giving people back what injury or illness had taken from them. I trusted Sarah completely. More than that, I wanted to support her work. I'd always been comfortable in my own skin, a cisgender man who'd never questioned his identity or his body. I thought that stability made me an ideal research participant, someone whose baseline was clear and uncomplicated. The initial protocol was straightforward. Twice-weekly injections of a hormone therapy compound, monthly tissue scans, regular blood work, and detailed journaling about any physical or psychological changes. Sarah explained that the therapy worked by activating dormant cellular pathways, essentially teaching the body to rebuild and adapt more efficiently. The risks seemed minimal. Some participants experienced mild fatigue, slight mood fluctuations, occasional sensitivity in various tissues as they became more responsive to the treatment. Nothing that worried me. Nothing that seemed like more than a minor inconvenience in service of groundbreaking research. The first 3 months were unremarkable. I felt good, actually. More energized than usual. My skin seemed healthier, my sleep deeper. I dutifully recorded everything in my research journal, noting the subtle shifts in how my body felt as it moved through space. Sarah was thrilled with my progress, showing me scans that revealed increased cellular responsiveness throughout my tissues. Everything was proceeding exactly as her models had predicted. It was in the 4th month that I started noticing changes I hadn't expected. A tenderness in my chest that persisted even when I wasn't receiving injections. A slight softening of my body's contours that I initially attributed to changes in my exercise routine. My emotional responses became more intense, more immediate. I found myself crying at movies that would have left me unmoved before, feeling joy and sadness with a sharpness that was both beautiful and unsettling. I told myself this was normal. Expected variation within the bounds of the research protocol. Sarah had warned me that hormone therapy could affect emotional processing. I was experiencing exactly what we'd discussed. Nothing to be concerned about. But then came the morning I woke up feeling fundamentally different in my own body. Not sick, exactly. Not in pain. Just profoundly, undeniably changed in a way I couldn't articulate. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I recognized but no longer entirely understood. The face was mine. The eyes were mine. But something essential had shifted beneath the surface, like the earth moving beneath a familiar landscape. I called Sarah immediately. She came home from the lab and examined me with the careful attention of both a researcher and a partner, her professional objectivity warring with her personal concern. After an hour of questions and basic assessments, she insisted we go to the research facility for a complete workup. The scans took 3 hours. Tissue imaging, hormonal panels, genetic sequencing, cellular analysis. Sarah barely spoke during the process, her expression growing more focused and more troubled with each result that appeared on her screens. I watched her face, trying to read in her features what my body was telling her that I couldn't yet understand. Finally, she sat down across from me in the small consultation room, her hands folded on the table between us, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "Alex," she said quietly, "I need to show you something. And I need you to stay calm while we figure out what this means." She turned her tablet toward me, displaying a scan I didn't immediately comprehend. It looked like an internal image of someone's abdomen, tissues highlighted in different colors to show various structures and systems. Sarah zoomed in on a particular region, tracing with her finger a formation that glowed distinctly in the imaging. "This is you," she said. "These scans were taken an hour ago." I stared at the screen, not understanding what I was seeing. Just biological complexity, the mysterious interior that everyone carries but never directly observes. "What am I looking at?" I asked. Sarah's voice was steady, clinical, but I could hear the tremor beneath her professional calm. "Your body has developed something we didn't anticipate. The hormone therapy, combined with the cellular scaffolding techniques, has triggered an adaptive response far beyond our predicted parameters. Your tissues haven't just become more responsive. They've reorganized. Created new structures." She highlighted a specific formation on the scan, and suddenly I understood what I was seeing. The shape was unmistakable, even to my untrained eyes. "That's not possible," I whispered. "It shouldn't be," Sarah agreed. "But according to every diagnostic tool we have, your body has developed functional reproductive anatomy. Uterine tissue, fallopian structures, supporting vasculature. All of it integrated into your existing biology in a way that appears not just viable, but stable." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling like I might fall despite sitting down. "You're telling me I have a uterus," I said flatly. "Functionally, yes. A completely unexpected outcome of the cellular reprogramming. Your body has apparently interpreted the therapy protocol as an instruction to build missing components, to complete a biological system it detected as incomplete." I couldn't process what she was saying. It was too strange, too far outside the boundaries of what I understood as real. "People don't just grow organs," I protested. "That's not how bodies work." "Under normal circumstances, no," Sarah said. "But this therapy specifically targets the pathways that govern tissue development and adaptation. We've just never seen it expressed this way. Never seen it create rather than merely restore." I stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to feel my body as something solid and comprehensible. But even walking across the small room felt different now, as if the knowledge alone had changed my physical experience of myself. "What does this mean?" I asked. "What happens now?" Sarah's expression was a mixture of scientific fascination and deep personal concern. "Medically, we need to understand the extent of the development. Whether these structures are just present or actually functional. Whether they pose any health risks. And we need to decide how to proceed with your treatment." "And personally?" I asked, hearing the edge in my own voice. She came to me then, taking my hands in hers. "Personally, this is terrifying and amazing and something we'll figure out together. But Alex, I need you to understand something. These scans suggest that these structures aren't just present. They're integrated, vascularized, connected to your endocrine system. Your body isn't rejecting them. It's supporting them as if they've always been there. The implication hung in the air between us, too enormous to speak aloud. You're saying I couldn't even finish the sentence. I'm saying we need to understand what your body is now capable of, Sarah said carefully. And we need to do that with a full medical team, not just me. This is beyond anything I can ethically manage alone. The next weeks were a blur of appointments, consultations, and tests. Sarah assembled a small team of specialists she trusted completely, people who understood the sensitivity of what we were dealing with. An endocrinologist, a reproductive specialist, a geneticist, and a psychiatrist who specialized in working with people experiencing profound changes to their physical identity. Each appointment brought new information, and each piece of information felt like another step away from the person I'd always understood myself to be. The structures weren't just present but fully functional, capable of all the biological processes they would serve in any body. My hormone levels had shifted dramatically, my endocrine system adapting to support the new anatomy. My body had essentially created a parallel reproductive system, integrated so seamlessly that it appeared to have always been part of my physiology. But the most shocking revelation came during a consultation with Dr. Patricia Morrison, the reproductive specialist Sarah had brought in. She reviewed my scans with the meticulous attention of someone who'd spent decades studying human fertility, and her conclusion was delivered with a gentleness that somehow made it more devastating. Based on everything we're seeing, she said, your body hasn't just developed these structures. It's prepared them. The uterine lining is responsive. Your hormonal cycles have established themselves. From a purely biological standpoint, you have the capacity to conceive and carry a pregnancy. The room went silent. I felt Sarah's hand tighten around mine. That's impossible, I said again, knowing even as I spoke that I was arguing against evidence, against reality itself. It shouldn't be possible, Dr. Morrison agreed. But impossibility is often just a failure to account for variables we haven't encountered. Your case is unprecedented, but the biology is clear. Your body has made itself capable of something we've never seen in someone of your chromosomal makeup. I left that appointment in a state of profound dissociation. Walking through the parking lot to Sarah's car, I felt like I was piloting a body I no longer recognized, inhabiting a stranger's life. Every person we passed seemed to exist in a different reality than mine, one where bodies followed predictable rules and identities remained stable and knowable. That night, I stood in front of our bathroom mirror for over an hour, examining my reflection with desperate attention. I looked like myself. The same face I'd shaved that morning, the same shoulders, the same arms and hands. But beneath the surface, I carried something entirely foreign, an impossibility made flesh. Who was I now? Was I still the man I'd always understood myself to be? Could identity survive such a fundamental disruption? The questions circled in my mind without resolution, each one spawning a dozen more. Sarah found me there, still staring at my own face as if I might find answers written in my features. Talk to me, she said softly. I don't know what to say, I admitted. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I don't know if I'm supposed to be horrified or amazed or grateful or angry. I don't know anything anymore. She stood beside me, and we looked at our reflections together. Two people who loved each other, whose lives had become entangled in ways we'd never imagined. This is my fault, she said quietly. My research. My protocols. I did this to you. I consented, I reminded her. I chose to participate. Neither of us could have predicted this. But I should have, she insisted. I should have seen the possibility. Should have built in more safeguards. I turned to face her directly. What happens now isn't about blame. It's about deciding who I am in light of what's happened. And I don't know how to do that. The psychiatrist, Dr. James Rivera, became my anchor in the weeks that followed. Twice weekly, I sat in his office and tried to articulate the profound disorientation of inhabiting a body that had betrayed every assumption I'd held about myself. He didn't offer easy answers. Instead, he asked questions that forced me to examine what I actually believed about identity, about gender, about the relationship between body and self. You keep using the word betrayal, he observed during one session. As if your body has acted against you. But what if we think about it differently? What if your body is simply more adaptive than you realized? Neither betraying you nor obeying you, just responding to conditions in ways that prioritize survival and integration? But I didn't want this, I protested. I never asked for this capability. No, you didn't, he agreed. But many people experience changes to their bodies they didn't request. Illness, injury, aging. What makes this different for you? I struggled to articulate it. Because this doesn't feel like loss. It feels like transformation into something I never chose to become. Like I'm being forced to be someone else. Are you someone else? He asked. Or are you the same person, now holding a truth about your body you didn't know before? The question haunted me. I began to realize that my crisis wasn't really about the physical changes themselves. It was about what those changes meant for my understanding of who I was. I'd always defined my gender, my identity, as fixed and uncomplicated. Male, straightforward, unambiguous. That certainty had been comforting, a foundation I never questioned. Now that foundation had cracked, and I was falling through into something far more complex. I started reading everything I could find about gender, identity, embodiment. I talked to people who'd experienced profound physical transitions, who'd learned to rebuild their sense of self when their bodies changed in fundamental ways. I discovered communities of people who existed outside the binary categories I'd always taken for granted, who'd forged identities based not on biological inevitability but on conscious choice and authentic self-knowledge. Their stories didn't give me easy answers, but they gave me something more valuable. Permission to not know. Permission to sit with uncertainty and confusion without needing to resolve it immediately into a neat category. 6 weeks after the diagnosis, Sarah and I sat down together for the conversation we'd been avoiding. The medical team wanted to know how to proceed. The hormone therapy could be discontinued, potentially reversing some of the changes, though no one could guarantee what would remain permanent. Surgical intervention was possible, removing the newly developed structures, though the risks were significant and the outcomes uncertain. Or we could do nothing. Let my body stabilize in its new configuration. Live with the changes and see what that meant for both of us. What do you want? Sarah asked. I don't know, I admitted. Every option feels like I'm making a choice about who I am, and I don't know yet who that person should be. Then maybe we don't decide right now, she suggested. Maybe we give you time to figure out how you feel before we commit to any irreversible interventions. It was the kindest thing she could have said. Permission to exist in uncertainty, to not force resolution before I was ready. We decided to continue the medical monitoring but halt the active therapy. Let my body settle into whatever equilibrium it was finding. Give me space to understand what this new configuration meant for my life, my relationship, my sense of self. The months that followed were the most challenging of my life. Not because of physical discomfort, but because of the constant internal negotiation between who I'd always believed myself to be and who I was apparently becoming. I experienced my first menstrual cycle, a biological process I'd only understood abstractly suddenly becoming immediate and physical. I dealt with hormonal fluctuations that affected my mood, my energy, my emotional landscape in ways I'd never had to navigate. But I also experienced something unexpected. A strange kind of wholeness. As if some part of me I'd never known was missing had quietly filled in. I couldn't explain it, couldn't justify it rationally. But there were moments, standing in the shower or waking up in the morning, when I felt more present in my own body than I ever had before. I started therapy not just with Dr. Rivera but with a support group for people experiencing complex gender identities. I expected to feel out of place, my situation too unique to relate to anyone else's experience. Instead, I found resonance. These were people who understood what it meant to have your body and your identity exist in conversation rather than in fixed alignment. Who'd learned to build a sense of self based not on biological destiny but on conscious engagement with who they actually were. I told my story in that group for the first time, and instead of shock or disbelief, I received understanding. Acceptance. One person, a trans woman who'd spent years reconstructing her relationship with her own body, said something that stayed with me. Bodies change. That's what they do. But you get to decide what those changes mean. Not your biology, not society's expectations. You. That's the hardest and most liberating truth there is. I realized she was right. I'd been waiting for my body to tell me who I was, to provide some definitive answer. But identity doesn't work that way. It's not something you discover like a hidden truth. It's something you construct, day by day, choice by choice, in the space between who you've been and who you're becoming. 8 months after the diagnosis, Sarah and I had another conversation. This one was different. Not about medical decisions, but about our relationship, our future, what we both wanted from the life we were building together. I know this isn't what you signed up for, I said. She looked at me with surprise. Neither of us signed up for this. But I'm not going anywhere. I love you, Alex. Not your body configuration. Not your biological capabilities. You. But what if I'm different now? I asked. What if I'm not the person you fell in love with? You're exactly the person I fell in love with, she said firmly. You're just learning more about who that person is. And I want to be part of that discovery. Even if it means uncertainty? I pressed. Even if I can't promise you I know where this ends? Especially then, she said. Because that's what love is. Not demanding that someone stay fixed to match your expectations. But honoring whoever they're becoming. I felt something release in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying since the diagnosis. The fear that this change would cost me everything. That becoming something unexpected would mean losing the person who mattered most. I've been thinking about something, I said carefully. Something I'm not sure I understand yet, but that feels true. What is it? I don't think I'm a man anymore, I said, hearing the words aloud for the first time. Or maybe I'm still a man, but not only a man. Or maybe gender itself is too simple a category for what I am now. I don't have language for it yet. But the person I was before, who thought of himself as straightforwardly, uncomplicatedly male, that person doesn't exist anymore. And I don't think I want him back. Sarah took my hand. Then we figure out together who you are now. The revelation didn't solve everything. I still struggled with dysphoria, with moments when my body felt foreign and wrong. I still navigated complex feelings about what my new capabilities meant, whether the possibility of pregnancy was something I should explore or something I needed to protect myself from contemplating. But I also began to experience moments of profound rightness. Times when I felt aligned with myself in ways I'd never accessed before. I experimented with different ways of presenting, different pronouns, different ways of naming my experience. I found myself drawn to they/them pronouns, to language that acknowledged complexity rather than demanding resolution into binary categories. Sarah supported every exploration, every experiment. She held space for my confusion without trying to resolve it, for my grief at losing old certainties without dismissing it, for my excitement about discovering new aspects of myself without making it about her needs or expectations. 1 year after the diagnosis, the medical team convened for a comprehensive review. All the specialists gathered to discuss my case, to decide what recommendations to make for my ongoing care. I sat in that conference room, surrounded by people examining scans and charts and data about my body, and realized something important. This was my life they were discussing. My body. My identity. And while I valued their expertise, while I needed their medical knowledge, the ultimate authority on what this all meant had to be me. When Dr. Morrison asked what I wanted to do about the new anatomy, whether I wanted to pursue removal or simply continue monitoring, I surprised myself with my answer. I want to keep it, I said. Not because I know what I'll do with it. Not because I have plans to use these capabilities. But because removing it feels like denying something true about who I am now. Like trying to force myself back into a category that no longer fits. Sarah squeezed my hand. And I want to continue building a life that makes room for all of this complexity, I continued. I don't know yet what that looks like. Whether I'll identify as transgender, as non-binary, as something that doesn't have a name yet. Whether I'll ever choose to explore the possibility of pregnancy or whether that will remain just a theoretical capability. But I know I'm tired of fighting against what is. Tired of treating my own body like a problem to be solved rather than a reality to be lived. The specialists nodded, making notes. They talked about ongoing monitoring, about hormone management to maintain stability, about the psychological support I'd need as I continued to navigate this unprecedented situation. But beneath all the medical language, I heard something else. Acceptance. Not just of my case as a fascinating anomaly, but of me as a person with the right to decide what my own transformation meant. Life didn't become simple after that decision. I still had difficult days, moments when I felt overwhelmed by the strangeness of my own existence. I had to navigate social situations where people made assumptions about my gender that no longer fit. I had to explain my situation to family and friends, watching some respond with understanding and others with confusion or discomfort. My parents struggled the most. They'd raised a son, and now I was asking them to see me as something more complex than that simple category allowed. My father, in particular, seemed to experience my change as a personal loss, as if I'd died and been replaced by someone else. I'm still me, I told him during a painful conversation. I'm still your child. I just understand myself differently now. But you were happy, he protested. You never said anything was wrong. Nothing was wrong, I tried to explain. This isn't about fixing something broken. It's about becoming more fully myself. He didn't understand, and I accepted that he might never fully understand. But over time, he made efforts. Started using my preferred pronouns, even when he stumbled. Asked questions about my experience instead of arguing with it. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. My mother surprised me with her adaptability. She'd always been more emotionally intuitive, more willing to accept things that didn't fit neat explanations. She told me once, I gave birth to you, but I don't own who you become. That's your work, not mine. It was the most loving thing she could have said. Sarah and I continued to build our life together. We had conversations about what my changed biology meant for our future, whether we wanted to explore the possibility of having children through my newfound capabilities. It was strange, exciting, terrifying. The idea that we could create a family without involving outside intervention, that my body now held possibilities we thought would require entirely different paths. We decided not to rush that decision. To give ourselves time to settle into this new reality before adding another layer of complexity. But knowing the possibility existed changed something between us. Made our future feel less prescribed, more genuinely open. I returned to my work in bioethics with a transformed perspective. Suddenly, all the abstract questions I'd spent years debating academically had become intensely personal. What does it mean to consent to medical intervention when you can't fully predict the outcomes? How do we balance scientific advancement with respect for human autonomy? Where do we draw the line between treatment and transformation? I began writing about my experience, not to sensationalize it, but to contribute to discussions about embodiment, identity, and medical ethics. I found that my story resonated with people I'd never expected. People dealing with chronic illness that changed how they understood their bodies. People who'd experienced gender transition. People who'd survived accidents or procedures that left them inhabiting flesh that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. We were all, in different ways, negotiating the same fundamental question: who are we when our bodies change in ways we didn't anticipate? I came to believe that identity isn't something fixed inside us, waiting to be discovered. It's something we create in response to our lived experience. My body had changed, yes. But more importantly, my relationship to my body had changed. I'd stopped seeing it as a container for some essential self and started experiencing it as part of the ongoing process of becoming whoever I was. 2 years after the diagnosis, I attended a conference on gender and medicine. I was invited to speak on a panel about embodiment and transformation, to share my perspective as someone who'd experienced profound and unexpected change. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience of researchers, clinicians, activists, and people navigating their own complex relationships with gender and identity, I felt something click into place. This was my purpose. Not to be a curiosity, not to represent some impossible anomaly, but to help expand our collective understanding of what human experience can encompass. I told my story, all of it. The trust, the transformation, the crisis, the slow rebuilding of self-understanding. I talked about the fear and the unexpected moments of rightness. The loss of certainty and the gain of authenticity. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping, and others joined, and suddenly I was standing in front of a room full of strangers who somehow understood. Afterward, people approached me with their own stories. A trans man who'd experienced unexpected changes during his hormone therapy. A woman whose autoimmune condition had forced her to reconceive her entire relationship with her body. A non-binary person who'd never felt at home in their flesh until they stopped trying to make it conform to anyone's expectations. We were all, in our different ways, pioneers in the landscape of human possibility. Not because we'd chosen transformation, but because we'd chosen to honor whatever transformation came and make meaning from it. Sarah watched from the audience, and when our eyes met, I saw pride in her expression. Not the pride of a researcher whose work had produced interesting results, but the pride of a partner who'd witnessed someone she loved grow into fuller selfhood. That night, lying in our hotel room, she asked me something she'd never quite articulated before. "Are you happy?" she said. "With how everything turned out?" I thought about it, really considered the question. "I don't know if happy is the right word," I said finally. "But I'm real. I'm more genuinely myself than I've ever been. And that feels worth all the confusion and pain it took to get here." She kissed me then, soft and certain, and I felt loved in a way that honored all of my complexity rather than despite it. 3 years after the diagnosis, Sarah and I made a decision. We wanted to start a family. And we wanted to explore whether my body could actually support a pregnancy, not just theoretically but in practice. It was terrifying. The medical unknowns alone were substantial. No one had ever monitored a pregnancy in someone with my particular biological configuration. The risks were unquantified, the outcomes unpredictable. But after months of consultation with specialists, after long conversations about what we were willing to risk and what we most wanted, we decided to try. The fertility process was strange, navigating medical systems designed around binary assumptions about bodies and reproduction. But we found doctors willing to work with us, willing to approach my case with curiosity and respect rather than just clinical detachment. When I got the positive pregnancy test, I experienced a cascade of emotions so complex I couldn't begin to untangle them. Joy, terror, disbelief, wonder. My body, which had already surprised me so profoundly, was now doing something I'd witnessed from the outside my entire life, but never imagined experiencing from within. The pregnancy itself was closely monitored. Weekly appointments, constant scans, a medical team tracking every development to understand how my unusual biology would handle the process. I experienced morning sickness, exhaustion, the bizarre sensation of my body reshaping itself to accommodate another life. But I also experienced something transcendent. A connection to the child growing inside me that felt primal and profound. This wasn't about gender, wasn't about conforming to or rejecting any category. This was about creation, about my body's astonishing capability to nurture life. Sarah was with me through every moment, every appointment, every midnight anxiety spiral when I worried about the 1,000 things that could go wrong. She talked to my belly, sang to our developing child, reminded me constantly that whatever happened, we were in this together. The pregnancy progressed normally, remarkably so given how unprecedented the situation was. My body adapted, supported, provided exactly what was needed. The medical team was amazed. I was humbled. This flesh I'd struggled to understand, that had thrown my entire identity into question, was performing one of the most miraculous acts possible with apparent ease. Our daughter was born on a clear autumn morning, after 14 hours of labor that left me exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. When they placed her on my chest, still damp and squalling, I looked into her face and understood something I'd been circling around for years. Identity isn't about fitting into categories. It's about honoring the truth of your lived experience. I was a parent now, had given birth, had carried and nurtured life. But that didn't make me a woman any more than my chromosomes made me a man. I was simply myself, complex and categorical defying, exactly as I was meant to be. We named her Maya, after the Sanskrit word for illusion, because she taught us that so much of what we think we know is just stories we tell ourselves about how the world must be. Watching Sarah hold our daughter, seeing the love and wonder in her face, I felt gratitude for the strange path that had brought us here. If someone had told me 5 years earlier that I would participate in a research study that would transform my body, force me to rebuild my understanding of my own identity, and eventually lead to me giving birth to a child, I would have thought they were describing someone else's life entirely. But this was my life. Unexpected, unprecedented, and more authentically mine than anything I'd planned. The months after Maya's birth were in education in parenthood, in sleep deprivation, in the fierce protective love that comes with being responsible for a tiny human. But they were also an ongoing negotiation with identity. People saw me with an infant, assumed I was her mother, and I had to decide each time whether to correct them, explain my situation, or simply let the assumption stand. I found myself caring less about the labels others used and more about the truth of my relationship with my child. I was her parent. I'd carried her, birthed her, was now feeding and caring for her. The specific terminology felt less important than the reality of the bond between us. Sarah and I navigated the logistics of family life, two parents who loved each other and our child, whose family structure didn't fit any standard template. We made up our own traditions, our own language for what we were to each other and to Maya. When Maya was 6 months old, I returned to my work, writing and speaking about identity, embodiment, and medical ethics. But now I brought a new dimension to the conversation. I could talk not just about transformation and adaptation, but about what comes after. About building a life that honors complexity instead of trying to resolve it into simplicity. I met others who'd walked similar paths, people whose bodies had surprised them, who'd learned to build identity in the space between categories. We formed a small but growing community, sharing resources, supporting each other through the ongoing work of living authentically in a world that prefers easy classification. I realized that my experience, while unique in its specifics, was part of a larger human story. The story of how we respond when life doesn't follow the script we expected. When our bodies change, when our identities shift, when we're forced to let go of certainty and embrace mystery. Some days were harder than others. I still had moments of dysphoria, times when I looked at my body and felt profoundly disconnected from it. I still struggled with social situations where people made assumptions I didn't fit. I still had to explain my situation to doctors, to family members, to strangers who felt entitled to understand my biology. But I also had moments of deep peace. Times when I felt completely aligned with myself, when the complexity of my identity felt like richness rather than confusion. Times when I looked at Maya and Sarah and felt profound gratitude for the unexpected path that had brought us together. 5 years after the diagnosis, I stood in front of another conference audience. This time, I wasn't speaking as someone still figuring things out. I was speaking as someone who'd walked through the fire of identity crisis and come out the other side. Not fixed, not resolved into tidy categories, but whole. I talked about the illusion of fixed identity, about how we spend so much energy trying to be consistent when the truth is that we're all constantly becoming. I talked about the courage it takes to honor your own transformation instead of fighting to stay who you were. I talked about love that makes room for change, about families that get built in unexpected configurations, about the profound gift of being seen and accepted in all your complexity. And I talked about my daughter, growing up in a family that teaches her that there are more ways to be human than any single story can capture. That bodies are capable of astonishing things. That identity is something you create rather than something you're assigned. After my talk, a young person approached me, barely 20, with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," they said. "I've been so scared. My body is changing in ways I didn't expect, and I thought it meant I was broken. But hearing your story, I realize maybe I'm just becoming." I hugged them, this stranger who somehow understood. "You're not broken," I said. "You're human." And being human means being more surprising and complex than you ever imagined. That night, I called my parents. My father answered, and I could hear the warmth in his voice, the acceptance that had slowly replaced his initial confusion. We talked about Maya, about the article I just published, about the ordinary details of our lives. Before we hung up, he said something that brought tears to my eyes. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not for being extraordinary. For being brave enough to be exactly who you are." It was everything I needed to hear, years too late to change the painful moments of our journey, but perfectly timed to affirm where we'd arrived. Now, 6 years after that initial diagnosis, I live a life I couldn't have imagined. I'm a parent, a partner, a writer, a speaker, an advocate. I'm someone whose body tells a story about human possibility that most people don't believe until they see the evidence. I'm someone who's learned that identity is fluid, that categories are provisional, that the only authentic way to live is to honor whatever truth emerges from your lived experience. I look at Maya, now 5 years old, curious and confident and completely comfortable with having a family that doesn't look like anyone else's. She knows that some people's stories are more complicated than they first appear. That love is more important than categories. That her parents' body did something amazing, and that amazing things come in forms we don't always expect. She'll grow up knowing that gender is more complex than simple boxes. That bodies are capable of transformation. That identity is something you get to create rather than something that's handed to you. And maybe, just maybe, she'll grow up in a world that's a little more ready to accept people whose stories don't fit the standard templates. Sarah and I still talk about that initial research study, about the moment when everything changed. Sometimes she still carries guilt about what happened, about the unexpected outcomes of her work. But I remind her that I consented. That I participated willingly. And that while I would never have chosen this particular transformation, I can't imagine now who I would be without it. The body I inhabit now is undeniably mine. Not because it's the one I was born with, but because it's the one I've learned to live in, to honor, to accept in all its strangeness. The identity I claim is undeniably mine. Not because it fits existing categories, but because I've built it piece by piece from the raw materials of my lived experience. I am not a man, though I was raised as one. I am not a woman, though I've given birth. I am not easily categorized as transgender, though my body and identity have both transformed. I am simply myself, a human being who's learned that the most important journey is not from one fixed identity to another, but from certainty to authenticity. This is what I've learned: bodies change. Identities evolve. The categories we use to understand ourselves are useful but incomplete. The most important thing is not to fit into a pre-existing box, but to honor the truth of your own experience, whatever form that takes. I've learned that love worth having makes room for transformation. That family can be built in configurations we never imagined. That courage isn't about charging forward fearlessly, but about continuing to show up even when you're terrified and confused. I've learned that identity is a practice, not a destination. Something you return to again and again, refining and revising as you understand yourself more fully. And I've learned that the human body, for all the ways we try to categorize and control it, is ultimately a mystery. Capable of adaptation and transformation that science is only beginning to understand. Capable of creating life, of healing, of surprising us with possibilities we never imagined. When people ask me now if I regret participating in that research study, if I wish I could go back to the simpler certainty of who I was before, I tell them honestly, I don't know. There's grief in losing that certainty, in having your entire understanding of yourself disrupted. But there's also profound growth in being forced to rebuild your identity on firmer, more authentic ground. I am who I am because of what happened. Not despite it, but because of it. And that person, complex and category-defying as they are, is someone I've learned to not just accept but to genuinely appreciate. As I finish writing this, Maya is playing in the next room, building elaborate structures out of blocks and narrating complex stories to her toys. Sarah is in her lab, continuing her research, now with a profound understanding of both the promise and the responsibility of work that can transform human bodies. And I'm here, in the space we've built together, feeling grateful for the unexpected path that brought us all to this moment. My body still surprises me sometimes. Still does things I don't fully understand. But I've made peace with that mystery. I've learned that you don't need to fully understand something to honor it, to live with it, to let it be part of your story. This is my story. Not of becoming someone else, but of discovering that I was always more than I knew. That the boundaries I thought were fixed were actually fluid. That transformation, while terrifying, can also be a doorway to more authentic living. I don't have all the answers. I still struggle sometimes with who I am and what my particular configuration of identity and embodiment means. But I've learned that it's okay not to have answers. That uncertainty is not the enemy of authenticity. That you can build a meaningful life on questions rather than certainties. To anyone listening who's dealing with their own unexpected transformation, their own crisis of identity, their own body that's surprised them by doing something impossible, you're not alone. Your story matters. Your experience is valid. And while the path forward may be unclear, while you may not fit into any existing category, that doesn't make you broken. It makes you human in all the complex, surprising, beautiful ways that being human can mean. Identity is not about finding yourself. It's about creating yourself, day by day, choice by choice, in honest response to your lived experience. It's about having the courage to be exactly who you are, even when who you are doesn't fit anyone's expectations, including your own. This is what I've become, not a man or a woman, not transgender or cisgender, not fitting comfortably into any category. But simply, completely, authentically myself. A person who's learned that the greatest gift you can give yourself is permission to be complex. Permission to change. Permission to build an identity that honors the full truth of your experience. And in that permission, I've found freedom. Thank you for watching and spending this time with me. If this story helped you understand yourself or others a little better, feel free to explore more on the channel.